Our first guest ever on our webcast is an incredible economist in Canada named Linda Nazareth. And this past week, Linda published an amazingly insightful editorial article in the Globe and Mail in Canada called How Will the Pandemic-Induced YOLO, YOLO meaning you only live once, economy hit Canada? Now, in addition to being a columnist at the Globe and Mail, Linda is an accomplished author and an economics consultant for large companies and government. She's great. She was a senior economist also at the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, and she was a senior on-air television economist for Business News Network. So she's also internationally well known as an authority on the future of work, and she's got a great podcast. And so it's my great pleasure and honor to have Linda Nazareth with us today. All right.
Good morning. Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. How's the weather now in the Toronto area?
There's a little bit of sunshine. We're hopeful it'll be spring sooner or later.
Okay, cool. And I understand there's been kind of a material issue getting vaccines in Canada. Is it getting better now, the situation?
It is getting much better. In fact, I think per capita, we're pretty close to the U.S., or we will be soon.
Okay,
they're
good.
rolling them out, and people are grabbing them up.
Okay, good. Progress is good. Okay, so let me kick it off with the first question. The pandemic has had a devastating impact on younger people, and the income gaps are widening materially. And in 2008, the younger generation was really unfairly penalized because they could not enter the workforce given the financial crisis. And so my question is, how does the current pandemic compare to 2008 when it comes to younger people entering the workforce?
Yeah, it's kind of apples and oranges, honestly, Chris, because 2008 was a recession. This was just like a turning off the lights, and we're going to turn them back on. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think there'll be a flurry of hiring, first thing, because everyone's getting back to business. And then after that, I think younger people and older people will be dealing with the things that were there before the pandemic, the fact that we have technological change that is changing demand for who businesses need, the fact that the ways we work are changing, that we're looking at a lot more contract work, a lot more freelancing, a lot less of a commitment to perhaps full-time employment, and a lot more need to be flexible. So they'll be looking at a different labor market than we had 10 years ago.
Cool. Interesting. Thank you. Next up, the YOLO, or You Only Live Once theme, per your article in the Globe and Mail, has, I think you mentioned 36% of Canadians under the age of 40 now considering a career change. Do you think that they're considering full-time jobs or several part-time jobs and side hustles?
I think most people are looking for full-time jobs because they don't have the financial stability to let them go out on their own. The ones that can will.
Right.
The side hustle thing is a really interesting thing, though, because that wasn't really available to us 10, 20 years ago the same way. I mean, you could try and get a side job, selling jewelry at a flea market, but now you can get on Etsy and sell it to the whole world. So it's a different thing. It's good and bad because some people look at that and say, this is governments abdicating their responsibility. People can pick up more work as an Amazon driver easier, so we don't have to do as much supporting them. And it's a debate that'll go on for a long time. But I think in general, it's a good thing. And we will see people right now trying to explore their options because, the pandemic has made us rethink some things.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's interesting. I was so frustrated at work when I worked in venture capital years ago because I wasn't passionate about it. That I started the side hustle of teaching. And it's so interesting because my children, I have 3 boys, their jobs have not been invented yet. And the way they communicate in business hasn't been invented yet from a future of work perspective. So let me move on to my third question, which is full-time employment in secular decline? And if so, what is the impact on the broader economy? Thank you.
It'll be interesting because I think there's so many different kinds of workers.
Right.
So the ones who are sort of the superstars, the ones who are really in demand, maybe with a specialty in some kind of software design, they'll be able to pick and choose, be a full-time worker or maybe go from project to project and be really happy about it. And then I think there's another group who would like to be full-time, would like that financial security, and it won't be available to them. So it's sort of a very complicated question. But to your question, will we see less of this core of full-time stable jobs? I think we will. I think it makes more sense for companies to bring in people as they need them, and technology makes it easier to do that. And we will have an adjustment costs as we get used to that. There'll always be a core of full-time workers. We're not going to take away from that, but it won't be, give this example, Chris, that it used to be the traditional family with mom and dad and two parents was the whole market. Now that's part of the market, but there's all different variations. And I think it'll be the same thing with workers.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay, cool. Moving on to our fourth of 7 questions. Given the you only live once trend, do you think that more people will not want to live in big cities and instead move to remote areas? And if so, what impact do you think this will have on real estate prices in larger cities?
Well, we are seeing that, are we not? During the pandemic, a lot of people have said, I can't afford to live close to the city and I can work from anywhere, so I'm going to go. But I think the next phase will be the interesting one when companies make their call, because during the pandemic, they had no choice. So somebody could have a job in New York and live in Iowa. But when people can come back to New York, they're going to have to say, you have to come back full time or you have to come back a certain amount of time. And it seems right now, most of them are opting to say, well, you have to come into work 2 days a week, which means you can't live in Iowa. So it'll be an interesting phase. We'll have to see what they can do in terms of getting the workers they want. And I think that will really tell the story. Because if you can't get the people you want, then you start making it easier for them to do the things they want to do.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, so now, since interest rates globally are very low, and since the prices of many products are spiking, including the price of lumber, which is near an all-time high, do you think that we're going to have a material inflation problem in the not too distant future? Thank you.
Well, I have a certain amount of faith in central banks. I don't think they've allowed inflation to get out of control for decades. So they will tighten policy when they need to. We're already seeing the markets doing that. I mean, we've seen market interest rates go up, treasury bonds and the like, and that's an indicator of what comes next. At one point, we said it'll be years before we see the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Canada or anyone tighten. I think it won't be years. It'll be a year and a half, maybe, before we see that, and they will let rates go up, but pretty slowly. I don't think we're going back to the days of the 1980s where we had, double-digit interest rates and mortgage rates, whatever they were, 18%, or whatever. I think it'll be gradual. But it is interesting to watch what's going on. You mentioned semiconductors and commodities. It's a supply chain issue, and it'll show up in terms of prices.
Cool. Thank you. Now, when this pandemic has been resolved, God willing, do you think employees will still spend 5 days a week in the office, or will there be a shift to several days per week of working from home? And what does this mean for big companies?
Yeah, it'll be an interesting change. It's interesting you use the word employees, and I use it sometimes, but more often now I just say workers, because so many people won't be employees necessarily. They'll be working maybe at one company, maybe at several. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. Companies haven't made up their minds yet. I think they would like to go back to the old model because it's comfortable, and also people miss being with each other, so there's a hunger to get back together, collaborate. It'll be a year of this, right? It'll be a year of everybody traveling, everybody doing everything they used to do, and then we'll kind of have the sober second thought. And I think when we get to that point, we will have fewer people in the office every day because they don't need to be. I mean, they need to be there sometimes, but you can collaborate other ways. I think we need to think about how to do that. Obviously, being on Zoom all the time has not made everybody happy, but we'll look for ways to be together.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny because I like fewer meetings, and I bought this for my wife, Christine, for Christmas a couple of years ago. It says, I survived another meeting that could have been an email. So, all right, so our last question is, since governments can no longer use monetary policy to cut rates to help the economy, and since governments can only print a limited number of additional stimulus checks from a fiscal policy perspective, what can governments do to improve economies?
Well, I mean, you have a little bit of room left in monetary policy because you're quantitative easing. You can be out buying bonds. You can also leave rates down for a long period of time, even as the economy gets better. From the fiscal side of things, you can change regulation. That doesn't cost money, and that tends to get economies going if you make it easier to do business and live in places that makes it that can be very stimulating. And you can put off raising taxes for a while, which is one of the dangers I see, because mounting debts, there's going to be a temptation to raise taxes, but you should be really judicious in how and when you do that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Linda, I want to thank you so much for coming on our webcast. Everybody, please check out Linda's podcast on the future of work, which I'm humbled to say I'll be a guest on soon. I will be, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks.
Only when.
Awesome. Thank you. And to learn more about Linda and her awesome podcast and her company, please visit relentlesseconomics.com. Thanks again, Linda. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Chris.
All right. Thank you. Take care now. Thanks.
Bye.